Hi, today we're going to talk about one of the most challenging issues that dementia caregivers face, and that's the topic of family issues. What do you do when your family just doesn't understand? What do you do when they just won't show up? What do you do when they won't cooperate? When they don't believe you when you say things? And this can come in various forms. It can come with one single family member. It can come with multiple family members. And so let's talk about that. I'm going to divide it into two parts. One is this is your nuclear family, a first marriage or the marriage where there are children involved. How do you manage those difficult relationships? How do you manage those difficult responses? This is very common, happens a lot. I talk to hundreds of people, or I have talked to hundreds of people over the last several years, either face-to-face or on the telephone or in some way I've been connected with them, and this comes up a lot. It's one of the reasons that I put this as a fairly significant part in this book, Treasures in the Darkness, Extending the Early Stage, because nobody else was talking about this. And yet it was happening. I was early on, I was online hearing people have to vent and be very frustrated and very hurt dealing with this. And so this book talks about that, has a section on how I handled this with two different family members who were doing two different kinds of things. And so I decided, after thinking about this a lot, I crystallized it down into two basic approaches with this close family members, that you take one track or the other track. And one track was to persevere with that family member, and the other track was to let go. And so let me define what I mean by that. The first one, the persevere track, was John and I had two children, a daughter and a son. Our daughter, Paige, was just absolutely ideal in terms of her response. She got it. She understood. She kind of sacrificed some of her own emotional health, I think, to support John and me. She was just there. I could vent with her. I could problem solve with her. She was emotionally very, very supportive. And she just made herself very available to us. Our son, who is an equally wonderful person, but a different personality, and a male versus a female, and he approached it differently. And for him, he told me just a year or so ago, very recently, and John passed away in 2015. It's now 2020 when I'm making this video. He told me that for him, it was just so hard to be there. It was hard to hear about it because he wanted to dwell on the good years. He wanted to remember all those good and wonderful memories and things about his dad, and he was afraid that all he would remember after his dad left this earth was going to be about the disease. And so that fear and need to protect himself basically created a barrier. And he made it very difficult for me to talk to him. He limited it. I talk about this in some detail, my struggle with the pain that caused me and the pain that it caused his dad in his trying to cope with this. One of the things we need to remember as caregivers is that everybody gets a form of dementia in the family. Not because we become demented, but we get our own response, our own reaction to this disease. And people are going to handle it and process it differently. My hope in educating about this is that no matter which person you are in that story, you can be reflective and you can think, okay, this has come, it's come into my life, I don't like it. What am I supposed to do with it? And avoiding it, I would suggest, is not your best choice as a human being. I think life is about a journey where we become, hopefully, more fully who we were intended to be, who we were created to be. And by embracing something that's unpleasant, there are lessons that can be learned there. And of course, my book is called Treasures in the Darkness. My argument is that they're actually treasures, especially if you can bring God into the story, that He will show you in the middle of a very dark journey. He will bring light and He will bring treasures. That happened to us in our family. So with my son, this was very difficult. He limited our time on the phone. He wouldn't let me tell anything in great detail. There was just a distance there and an awkwardness and a lot of pain. The other thing that you deal with is what's already happened before the diagnosis. You're going to have family history with different people. So my son had gone through a lengthy period, about 10 years, of establishing his independence from his parents. And we were a loving, close-knit family, but he really pushed away. He needed to get his own space. And our daughter did not do that so much. She kind of embraced family, and he pushed away. So that was already in the background. So these things are going to be happening in your family, most likely too. It is the rare family indeed where there's none of this. And if you have that, oh, you are blessed indeed. But most of us have some challenge. So with my son, the reason I chose to persevere was that I could see, in spite of these choices that he was making, I could see a desire to want to do the right thing. It was there. He was trying. He and his wife were trying. Both our children had gotten married shortly before the diagnosis, and so there were 2 new marriages in the story also. So we were trying to navigate that new becoming in-laws as well as remaining as supportive parents of adults. And so we had to navigate all that new turf with this disease playing into the story. And so relationships with my daughter-in-law, relationship with my son-in-law, and my daughter, they were all kind of new, and then all this got thrown into the mix too. So it really made for some interesting dynamics. I decided that persevering was the best option because I could see the heart of my son. In spite of some of his choices that happened over and over again that were painful, there was a reason to persevere. There was a reason to hang in there. He was trying. And I think if you can see that element happening in your relationship that might not be ideal, hang in there, persevere, look for things you can do that will bind you together, things that can bring some joy, things you can enjoy together, things you can have in common, just little moments, little times, and try to magnify those, emphasize those, focus on those as much as possible. And then I continued to be honest, and I would let him know, this hurts. I need for you to stop doing this. This is important. I didn't stop giving up what I felt was a proper statement to make based on what he was doing, if I felt that it was not productive and positive and helpful. But I tried to focus as much as I could on trying and persevering and looking for the things that would build the relationship while we were trying to calibrate it and get it into a healthier place. Okay, the other choice is the let go choice. And there was another person in my family, another very close family member, whose identity I basically have hidden. I call this person Joe in my book. And this person, there was a long family history there that it wasn't a healthy, good relationship going into diagnosis, not at all. And a lot of it was way beyond my control, and I'm a person that likes to fix things. I want it right, I want it good, and I had to come to terms with, and I talk in great length about how, in the book, how the counselor that we had helped me realize this was something I could not fix. It wasn't mine. It didn't belong to me. It belonged to Joe. And I had to let this relationship go. And what that meant was not rejecting this person. It wasn't disliking this person. It was basically just letting the person go. And there was a poem, a lovely poem, that was in another book by Jolene Brackey called Creating Moments of Joy, which, by the way, is a fantastic book. If you're a dementia caregiver, I recommend it. But she put in here a poem by an unknown author called Let Go. And some of the things that are in this poem are very important that I wanted to share with you. To let go does not mean to stop caring. It means I can't do it for someone else. To let go is not to cut myself off. It's the realization that I can't control another. To let go is to admit powerlessness, which means the outcome is not in my hands. To let go is not to try to change or blame another. It's to make the most of myself. To let go is not to care for, but to care about. To let go is not to judge, but to allow another to be a human being. To let go is not to deny, but to accept. To let go is not to nag, scold, or argue, but instead to search out my own shortcomings and correct them. To let go is not to regret the past, but to grow and live for the future. To let go is to fear less and love more. Now, I found that little poem in that book by Jolene Brackey called Creating Moments of Joy that I borrowed and put in my book in this section called Family Issues and Support. That poem was so powerful for me, so helpful for me. It helped me focus on what letting go was, that it was really a positive thing. It was something I had to do to make it through this journey because my energy was being unbelievably drained by this relationship. And so for a season of time while I was caregiving, I needed to just back away and let that person in a loving way, just let them go. Leave them alone, let them do their own thing, and stop being hurt by the fact that they weren't showing up. They just weren't showing up at all. I desperately needed them to show up. I made it clear, and they just weren't going to do it. And so I needed to let them go. Hugely important. I run into so many caregivers who have people in their close family units that this happens. It's very, very common. So I wanted to include it in the book. Everything in this book is in there for a reason. Absolutely everything's there for a reason. And by the way, everybody in the book, except the infamous Dr. Number 11, who diagnosed but refused to treat John's Lewy body dementia, which is very poor medicine, by the way. He didn't get any say-so at all in this book. But even Joe and every other character, especially my family members, everyone got to read this book in draft form and say, okay. And they had the right to have some say about what was here and included because it's very intimate. We were talking about our family. And the reason I did that is because nobody else was talking about it. And it was really important because it was hobbling. These problems were hobbling and hurting caregivers and draining their energy. So I hope that you won't be offended by these details. I hope that you will be able to think about and reflect on what's happening in my family. Some of these principles that she's talking about might help me. I had to remind myself, these are my words, constantly to focus on those who really were there. Those who chose to remain in the orbit of our lives while we were moving through this journey of darkness. So very, very important. The other thing I want to tell you about both these people, I do want to say that I could not have navigated this as well without the counselor that we had, Dr. Terry Ledford. He helped me through this, navigating this jungle of relationships. Oh, so well. What a difference he made in helping us. And now let's fast forward. This is 2020. Guess what? The relationship with my son is so much healthier, so much more positive, loving, and giving the relationship with Joe, I could write an entire book on this one. It's a miraculous thing. There were some very, very rough moments in Joe's life. But guess what? We're best friends now. And so it turned out well also. And that I give credit, the grace of God. Now, what about blended families? That one is the most difficult. That's when you have children from a first marriage, and then the parent gets, whether it's male or female, gets dementia, and you have a second spouse in the story who is now the primary caregiver. And so those children and that spouse can sometimes have a very difficult time navigating this together. They coming from different places. There may not be a level of trust. There may not be a level of love there that you desperately need to do this well. And so they can be quite difficult. You are dealing with not only the medical issues, but sometimes there's a financial struggle. Who's going to get the money? What do you know? All that legal paperwork that you do need to do. And I suggest that what spouses should do in this case is to get not only psychological counsel in how to handle it, but you may have to go to legal counsel, get some help. Sometimes you have to protect your own assets that were there before the second marriage, because sometimes the story can get pretty nasty. So in those situations, try, if you can sense, the same rules will apply in terms of persevering or letting go. If you can sense that there is a core of good motive coming from the right place, wanting to do the right thing, just not understanding, you try to do things that will let those children, those folks who are having such a struggle, oftentimes letting them keep that person in your home, letting them come and visit, or letting your loved one go and stay with them, as long as you're not worried about there being a battle over who has guardianship and all that. If you feel comfortable enough in that level to let them actually spend time, 5 days, ought to do it. Because if dementia is there, the person with dementia can do the showtime behavior, which is, oh, everything's fine, everything's normal. They will pull that energy up and they will be practically normal in the way they appear. But they're not going to be able to sustain that because the brain is eventually going to run out of that energy that it needs. And the symptoms that you've been talking about are going to show up. And so the arguments that they might be giving you that they think, oh, you're making this up, you're just doing this so you can get control of the money, whatever, that will go away if they get a good dose of what you deal with every day as the caregiver. And so I recommend that if you feel it is safe to do so, because you do need to protect your own assets if this is a second marriage. You do need to make sure that you remember that you are just as important as the person with the disease. You're both valuable human beings. You may have to set boundaries. Try to do this in a loving way. And if you can let go of some of these emotions and realize that they're having their own version of the disease, if there's a way to have one-on-one meetings with them, if there's a way to have a family meeting that's away from the loved one so that you can work some of these things out and not stress the person with dementia, that could also help you. I hope this has helped. I hope I've not gone into any depth. I have dealt a lot of times in one-on-one conversations where we have talked about individual issues and dived into it. But I'm hoping that this will help you. Remember, sometimes you have to let go. Sometimes you really need to persevere. If that person is coming from a place that they're doing as well as they can do under the circumstances and their motives are positive. So I hope this has helped you. Take care and hang in there. This is not an easy journey, but it's a doable journey. You can do this.